Hello and welcome to a new episode of Her Voice. Now, the exploitation of women, how do we define it? Well, the following definition is offered by Donna Hughes, a well-known researcher in the area of women's studies and women's advocate from the University of Rhode Island. She claims that it's a practice by which a person achieves sexual gratification, financial gain, or advancement through the abuse or exploitation of a person's sexuality by abrogating that person's human right to dignity, equality, autonomy, and physical and mental well-being. That is through trafficking, prostitution, mail-order bride trade, pornography, stripping, battering, incest, rape, and sexual harassment. Sexual exploitation preys on women and children made vulnerable by poverty and economic development policies and practices, refugee and displaced persons, and on women in the migrating process. It violates the human rights of anyone subjected to it, whether female or male, adult or child. So are women refugees in the Middle East following the war on Iraq and Syria exploited and abused? What about the plight of the Yazidi people, especially their women, and the humanitarian crisis that was created by the emergence of the terror organization ISIS? What's their situation? Let's watch this video that explains more about women exploitation before I introduce my special guest.
In August 2014, ISIS conquered the areas around Sinjar in Kurdish Iraq, forcing almost 50,000 Yazidis to escape. Yazidis live in South Turkey, northern Iraq and Syria, and are a minority regarded as devil worshippers by ISIS, who refers to them as pagans. It's a religion that one cannot convert to, only be born into it. Today, there are between 100,000 and 500,000 Yazidis in the world. ISIS enslaves their women and abuses them sexually, arguing that they can rightfully keep Yazidi women as slaves in order to perform better jihad because they are not Muslim. ISIS fighters do not need to marry these women for sexual gratification. A fighter can keep a Yazidi woman as a slave for his own pleasure. After attacking a village, ISIS typically separates the men and women. Men aged 14 and above are killed. The women are stripped naked and their bodies examined for breast size and attractiveness, and virginity tests are performed. A price is decided and the women are sold at a market, with the youngest and prettiest get the highest price. An article published by Mail Online reported, quoting the website IraqiNews.com as its source, that ISIS had published a document containing a price scheme outlining the going rate for women and children slaves. According to the document, girls 9 years old and under fetch the highest price and are sold for $170 each. 10 to 20-year-olds sell for $130, while those between 20 to 30 years of age are sold for $90. According to the document, no one is allowed to purchase more than 3 slaves unless they are foreigners such as Turks, Syrians or Arabs. In January and February 2016, Human Rights Watch interviewed 21 Sunni Muslim Arab women from the Hawaji area of Iraq and 15 women and girls from the Yazidi minority ethnic group, all of whom had fled ISIS-controlled areas, most in late 2015 after spending more than a year in captivity.
With me now is Baroness Emma Nicholson, who has kindly joined us here in the studio. Lady Nicholson is the Executive Chairman of the Ammar International Charitable Foundation, which works to recover and to sustain professional services in medicine, public health, education and basic need provision within refugee and other communities living under stress in war zones. She is also a member of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Human Trafficking, chairs the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Foreign Affairs and speaks regularly on healthcare and education in the Middle East and Eastern Europe. Lady Nicholson is also a member of the House of Lords. Welcome to the show, Lady Nicholson, and thank you so much for joining us today. It's such a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you very much.
Now, Lady Nicholson, could you tell us more about Ammar Foundation and how did it begin and what sort of work are you involved in, please?
The Ammar Foundation began out of my frustration in 1991 by the treatment of the Iraqi refugees and displaced people by Saddam Hussein. I was so concerned at the ending of the invasion of Kuwait when the Iraqi army returned to its own nation. I could just imagine what the dictator would do to them and to their families because they, in a sense, they had failed him. Yes. He'd come to my attention because of the Iran-Iraq war, which of course killed and ruined millions of Iranians and Iraqis and others.
Yes.
So I visited Iran and Iraq, both rather quietly. I wasn't a guest of Saddam Hussein, I can assure you.
Right.
And I saw that what I had been told by refugees here in Britain, it was far, far worse. And so I started to broadcast, talk. But much more importantly, I think if you see people in trouble, you do your very best to help.
Of course.
So I started immediately on my very first visit when I saw thousands and thousands of refugees, some with chemical wounds, chemical weapon wounds, by the way, in 1991, and began the Ammar Foundation almost on the spot. And the word Ammar, at first I was relating to marsh Arabs and refugees, and now we call it rebuilding lives, because Ammar, of course, is the builder in Arabic.
Yes, that's right.
We focus on the two key essentials that people need in life. You can't survive without decent access to health, and you can't really survive without any sort of education. If you're illiterate and non-numerate, you're not really surviving at all. So it's health and education tied together. And at the moment in Iraq, for example, running on a very small budget indeed, which is quite right, this is a charity, we have 1 million patients, 2,000 professional Iraqi staff, and about 250,000 pupils of all different ages. And not one of those million patients would have any access to health care. They're all IDPs, refugees, in the most dreadful situation. So we're there to help and support them, and about 80% of our work inevitably is on women and children. It's not because we exclude the men, no way, but it's just because the women and the children always have the greatest needs. So I think we've built so far, in conjunction with the Iraqi health directorates, I think it's over 100 public health centres, which is our million patients. And we're on the move all the time, pushing. As Daesh leaves the spot, we move in and set up a public health centre. So people can come back. If you don't put something like that there, what are people coming back to? So our next effort is we're raising money for another school, another health centre, and a village hall right up close to Daesh, as Daesh is being pushed back.
I see. Now, women in camps have faced physical sort of assault, exploitation and harassment, and are at risk of sex trafficking and modern-day slavery, both in Europe and obviously in Syria and Iraq. What strategies has Ammar Foundation put in place to help these women?
The Ammar Foundation has been working with whole health under the auspices of the World Health Organization. We're an implementing agency for the WHO, which is where our standards and training come from.
Right.
And therefore, health is not just the aspirin or prenatal or postnatal work. Health is physical, mental, and body. It's the whole person you're trying to restore to full, proper health. Get them upstanding, get them available to do what they want, develop their talents, have a job, help them find a job, or have a family, or do both. So that's what we do. And that means that always a part of our work has been psychological. Now, not in a sense of taking people to consultancies or anything like that. We work with women in their own homes, and we work with women and men and children in their own camps, and then they come to the health centres. We do a huge amount of what is called preventative medicine. We have over about 1,000 women health volunteers. These are very special ladies indeed. We recruit them specially, they're real volunteers, and we train them, and they belong to the health centre and to the health team, and they visit families, and they visit, each one of them takes about 50 families, and those are her families. So she gets to know, and every month she takes in the new lesson, and the lessons generally come from our team or from the World Health Organization. And of course, in the camps, our women health volunteers can take on a much bigger load, so they're doing about 150. And in camps, of course, we employ the people in the camps themselves, because getting a job brings back your self-worth.
Of course.
On top of that, the victims of sexual violence, and I've just stopped chairing the select committee for the prevention of sexual violence in conflict, and I'm now co-chairing the all-party parliamentary group for the same thing. The victims who came and gave us evidence in the House of Lords told us that teaching was one of the most important things. Sitting in a classroom with a teacher, formal education, formal training, that gave them back more powerfully than anything that sense of dignity and self-worth, the realization that they matter.
Right, right.
We teach at the moment. We have training centres alongside our health centres, for example, in the Yazidi camps. And there we teach sewing. And the young ladies say this is one of the best things. They have to concentrate so much on every single
to take them away from the
so it pushes away the
nightmare,
nightmare, which is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Of course.
And we've recently introduced chess, and they say that is just brilliant. So I'm fundraising for more chess sets. I'm fundraising for more chess teachers.
Oh, brilliant.
And I'm looking for a few really chess masters to come and do a game.
Oh, fantastic.
You know?
That is
so they say
idea.
that also, that pushes away the nightmares. So and we're thinking of more things like that all the time. And funnily enough, that combined with proper medical care brings people back to life, to self-worth, to dignity, to the knowledge of their own value, which is what gets destroyed when orate time and time again and kept tied up and in a cellar by these unspeakable monsters who, incidentally, the girls tell us, are high on drugs and watch violent videos. And generally, quite often, they're 50 years older than the girl.
That is disgusting. That is disgusting.
Well, getting back self-worth. Because people who've been raped, they're the ones who get raped again. And talking to girls who've just come out, and we've had a number of them visit us in London for health and everything else, you know, if they wanted to tell their story, it's absolutely clear what they've lost, their capacity to say no, or even to push somebody a little away. They must have said yes so often to save their lives.
Of course.
So to get them back some sort of strength is the key. And the best way of doing that is proper medicine, proper teaching, and proper tender, loving care. That's what we offer in the Amar Foundation.
That's brilliant. Now, we have on the phone Rosin Hanjul, a campaign specialist and the UK manager for Women's Affairs for Yazda UK. Welcome to the show, Rosin, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Rosin, I just wanted to ask you a question, which obviously is recently in the news. Now, Barrister Amal Kuluni and Ahmed Khoududa Burgess, the Deputy Executive Director of Yazda, have met with senior advisors to the former British Prime Minister David Cameron and his representatives of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office at 10 Downing Street to actually discuss efforts to secure accountability for crimes committed by ISIS against the Yazidi community and Nadia Murad. How confident are the Yazidi community in Barrister Amal Kuluni in bringing justice to Nadia and the Yazidi community?
I think actually they're very confident because you know, it's kind of it's recent and she kind of has the power to do something, I guess, because and I'm glad it's very she got in touch with us because it's just that I feel like a lot of the crimes that were committed against the Yazidi people were actually have been forgotten. I mean, since I started the campaign, it's gone a bit, you know, when I was setting up the campaign, it went in the news, the British public knew about it. But, you know, it's kind of gone a bit quieter now. And I feel like, you know, Emma will bring a good, you know, like bring back the attention to that community in particular, as well as other communities like Christians as well.
Right. Well, can you tell us more about Nadia Murad's story? Who is Nadia Murad?
Well, actually, Nadia Murad was, she is from Kocha in Sinjar, and when ISIS attacked her village, most of the girls, as well as Nadia herself, were taken into sexual slavery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And obviously she had to, you know, endure all that horrific experience that every other girl have been, you know, have gone through, really, the ones that have and she's obviously one of the, you know, courageous ones that managed to escape.
Brilliant, brilliant. You know, it's good to hear that someone like Nadia has actually got the willpower still to be able to voice what goes on in these camps. Now, in the New York Times, it stated that the trade in Yazidi women and girls has created a persistent infrastructure with a network of warehouses where the victims are held, viewing rooms where they are inspected and marketed, and a dedicated fleet of buses used to transport them. How likely is this investigation to be true, coming from the New York Times?
Well, you know, from what we've heard, actually, you know, most of the escapees, like the survivors, have, you know, told all of us really what's actually happened. And Nadia is, you know, one of them telling us exactly what has happened. Before, when I set up my campaign, I tried to, you know, get the British public as well as, you know, like bring the international attention to what was actually happening. If you look deeper into the conflict, and of course Nadia is doing an international campaign, she's doing a great job by telling everyone. In terms of you know, being true, I think, you know, most of it is actually very reliable, because we can, you know, we have heard from actual survivors telling us the same thing, really.
Brilliant. Now, what projects are put in place by Yazda UK to help the Yazidi women that were exploited, raped and tortured following their rescue?
Well, actually, Yazda is doing absolutely an amazing job. It's a fairly new charity, and it was set up at the time of the conflict, and when you know, a lot of girls were taken, as well as, you know, children and families that did escape from them, or they ran away before they were captured by IS. In terms of what we do, we basically, you know, we've tried to provide, you know, just simple things like food, water, taking them to camps, really. We bring, you know, kind of confidence and give hope back to the community. And obviously it is an Yazidi organization, but we help whoever that comes to us and ask for the help that they need. If we have helped Christians as well as the Yazidi people and other minorities as well. One of the important things we do is we have psychological programs that help the survivors to, you know, give them back hope, I guess, because, you know, what they had to go through, it's, you know, they are actually left hopeless.
Now, Rosen, you're a Yazidi yourself. A young girl like you, what makes you so involved with the Yazidi situation and Yazidi UK?
I think for me, when I was, you know, I came to the UK in 2008 when I was 10. Obviously, like, you know, when I looked at childhood here, is very different to what my childhood was like. You know, a lot of, you know, things like hearing gunshots and bombs going off was just a normal part of my childhood. And now I'm looking at it. I'm looking at what they go through. I mean, it's 10 times worse than what I had to go through. And it was, of course, I believe it should be everyone's duty to act and do something about what's happening. And of course, me being Yazidi, I'm going through, you know, the same thing and understanding what Yazidi people actually go through, as well as other minorities. I had to do something. You know, I just didn't think that, you know, my age would, or what I was doing would affect me. I don't think of that at all, because, you know, those girls, I just can't even imagine. Yeah. And if I keep telling myself, I tell others that the reason I did this, it could have easily been me.
That's true. That is true. I think it's not only you. I think it could easily be any one of us, actually. But no, that is unfortunately the sad truth about the situation back there. Well, Rose and Hanjul, good luck with everything that you do in the future, and carry on doing what you are at the moment, doing. Thank you so much for joining us today, and best wishes from everybody here at Her Voice.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Thank you, Rosen.
Thank you.
How confident do you think the Yazidi community about Amal Clooney?
Amal Clooney is a great lady. I know her mother, who's always been the foreign affairs reporter for Hayat newspaper. Right. And they're a fantastic family. And I'm sure that what she can do will be momentous. The only problem with the International Criminal Court is the slowness. We've been pressing very hard in the House of Lords, led by Lord Alton, for example, and myself also, to manage to get genocide attributed to ISIL, not just against Yazidis, but also against Christians, against Mandians, against the others they've aggressed, including, incidentally, Shia and Sunni.
That's true.
We want this to be labelled genocide.
Yes.
But the only problem with this, which is what Amal Clooney is chasing, is that it takes a very long time indeed.
Of course.
If you look at the Democratic Republic of Congo's success 2 weeks ago, it took 25 years to get that ogre to court in The Hague. So we have to run down that track as hard as possible. It's the highest court that the world has. But I say that at the same time, we must pursue local justice. So my committee strongly recommended that we look for local justice and regional justice.
Yes.
Justice is what all victims want. All victims. And we've had a number of young ladies over from Iraq as Ammar Foundation. I had 3, including Nadia. I was the first person to bring Nadia here, the Ammar Foundation.
Yeah.
And those 3 young ladies all gave evidence last June, not this June, to the select committee that I was chairing on prevention of sexual violence in conflict.
I see.
And that was a tremendous moment, because we managed to get that right up to the top. Because this report, of course, has gone global into the UN.
Yes.
And we also had a very, very inspiring young lady who had been kept for years in the bush in Uganda, I think it was. And she told the same story, but just from another part of the world. So please, everyone, understand, women are aggressed, girls are aggressed on a daily basis everywhere.
Yes.
Not just the one case, it's not just the one place. This is indicative of what is happening all over the globe. But at the moment, there are something like 60 million people in refugee camps globally, the largest number ever known. And that doesn't include internally displaced people, another set of millions.
Yes.
And when you've been raped, believe it or not, the single place where you're most likely to be raped again is in a refugee camp. So
right.
yes, we need Amal Clooney, and we need a whole lot more,
Yes, yes.
including Iraqi judges, including Egyptian judges, including all good, decent judicial systems should come together on this.
That's true.
All over the world.
That's true. Now, with me on the phone is Rofna Bijim, a human rights researcher for the Middle East and North Africa at Human Rights Watch. Thanks for joining us, Rofna, and welcome to Her Voice.
Thank you.
Now, Rofna, since 1978, when Human Rights Watch began adopting a mythology of publicly naming and shaming abusive governments through media coverage and through direct exchanges with policymakers, has it made any difference to human rights in the Middle East over the years, do you think, in your opinion?
Absolutely. We've had part of our mission is not only to investigate and expose human rights violations, but it's also to have impact, to change the situation on the ground. We've seen laws changed over the years. We've seen governments change policies. We've seen people being released from should not have been held in the first place. We've seen people who have been saved from death row. We've seen different changes take place, sometimes small, sometimes big.
Yes. Okay. Now, you're very much involved with women refugees that have fled from places like Iraq and Syria following their abduction, rape and abuse by Daesh or other militant groups. You've listened to their stories that must have left some sort of an impact on you. Could you tell us more about it, please?
Sure. I investigated the situation of Yazidi women survivors of violence, particularly sexual violence at the hands of Daesh. What we found was that ISIS or Daesh had committed an organized system of rape and sexual slavery amongst women and girls of the Yazidi community. This amounts to war crime, possibly crimes against humanity, or even possibly genocide. The acts that they took, that they organized and carried out, has been really horrific.
Right.
They included capturing women and girls along with men and boys, executing a lot of the young men, separating the women from older women, from women, and from girls, and then systematically assaulting them, trading with them, and raping them. And some of them have actually been treated as domestic servants as well. We also documented the situation of women who managed to flee. So since August 2013, when the Daesh had territories where the Yazidi community lived and had captured them, and over the course of time, women and girls had managed to escape. So there was trickling of women and girls who were escaping over the course of time. We were able to interview those women and girls and found out the stories of their what they faced and what other women and girls faced that they had known of as well. And we were also looking at their needs since they had left. So after surviving that, after escaping and arriving in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, where much of the displaced Yazidi community now reside, we also were looking at the services that were being provided by the Kurdish government. In particular, looking at the psychosocial services, particularly because they've been so traumatized, the medical services, as well as whether or not there had been enough done on stigma and reintegration of such survivors.
I see. Now, how could Human Rights Watch protect women's rights during the global refugee crisis that we are witnessing today?
There's a lot of elements to the refugee and displaced crisis that's existing today. So if I take, for example, the Yazidi community, by documenting not just what had happened to them, but looking at their needs specifically, we were able to determine that there was a serious lack of psychosocial services to women and girls. So women and girls talked about how they were having nightmares, they were finding it very difficult to move on with their lives. And when we looked around to find out about the services they were receiving, only one girl in February of 2015 said that she was receiving ongoing psychosocial care. And when we updated that work this year, we found, again, only one person of the group speaking to that was receiving ongoing psychosocial care. And the only difference that happened within the year since we documented the lack of psychosocial care was that there had been an increase in what is known as basic first aid psychosocial care. So some level of basic care was given, but not ongoing trauma counseling. And when we're talking about women and girls who had suffered huge amounts of incredible ordeals, who had been raped multiple times by sometimes multiple, and still have family members who are still under captivity or have been executed, they're incredibly traumatized. And despite that, the government and the international community have not put in place enough capacity and access for women and girls to be able to be provided with psychosocial care. In addition, we also looked at the level of access to justice they had. So, for instance, we looked at the fact that when they were being treated, receiving medical treatment, one of the things that, in terms of documenting rape, forensic documentation of rape, women who were unmarried, women or girls who were unmarried before they were captured by ISIS, were determined by a committee that they should go for what's known as virginity testing.
That's true.
As a way of documenting their rape.
Yes.
Now, virginity testing, it's mythical. It doesn't actually determine rape, doesn't determine whether or not sex really took place. And it's all about the hymen, whether or not the hymen is broken, of which some girls are born without hymen, some girls' hymens break when they're 6 years old, and so on. So we made it very clear to the authorities that this had to change, that this was not going to help. This was unhelpful to women, not only because this is not going to help in terms of justice later on, but it was harmful for women to undergo such testing. And the authorities, after we spoke to them this year, had said that they had changed their forensic documentation forms, and that they had agreed with at least a local judge that he would accept the new forms and will no longer accept virginity testing as part of post-rape examination.
I see, because that was actually my other question, was about your dispatch's report that you were calling for the virginity testing to end for Yazidi rape survivors. Do you think that report has made any difference to women's rights and the care that they are receiving following your report that you made about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen quite a difference. We've reported a number of times, but specifically after we called for psychosocial services to be increased, provided better capacity, we did see a somewhat increase in care in terms of much more than there was before. But it wasn't as much as we would like. We would like them to have ongoing trauma counseling. So we're still pushing for that level of access and care. In terms of the virginity testing, that was a big step forward. When it's not just an issue in Kurdistan, it's an issue across the region where a lot of countries conduct virginity testing as a way of determining whether or not sexual relations have taken place, sometimes to prosecute women, and in other situations in order to determine whether or not rape has taken place in order to prosecute the offender. Now, when you're looking at the virginity testing being problematic, unscientific, and therefore not useful, as well as being harmful to the women who are undergoing such tests, it becomes useless. It also means women who are married are not able to be tested correctly because they're deemed to have already have their hymen broken. So how do you determine that they were raped?
Right.
Now, there are UN guidelines that talk about how to forensically document women and girls who have been raped. That has nothing to do with the hymen. That has nothing to do with virginity. And that is what they need to have if they are going to document this properly. And in the end, when they do catch ISIS members, they're able to actually them. So that's where we're coming in right now, because while you've got a situation of women and girls pouring out of these areas who are now displaced, who have these stories, who have come forward and have reported it, yes, government can actually document this issue. They need to be doing so properly, because at some point you will have ISIS members in the dock. And if you want to prosecute them and convict them, you need to ensure that you've done the documentation properly.
Right, I see. So that is probably the vital part, is the documentation part, I believe then. Okay, just one more final question now, Ratna, before we leave you. What is the current situation with the women refugees in Europe? Because obviously you hear all the stories about their dire circumstances that they're living in, and especially those that are in the no-man lands. So what is sort of the impression that obviously Human Rights Watch is actually reflecting about their situation in Europe?
My colleagues have looked at the situation of the refugee and the migration taking place in Europe, but also beyond, in places like Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey as well. And we've documented how women who have been pregnant, who are with young children, but also their safety itself. The women who have crossed over, but or in unsafe areas, or who do not have access to bathrooms, for instance, which can sometimes be exposed to sexual violence. Women who are not able, for their own menstrual hygiene needs, are not able to access proper menstrual care. Who also, as a result of their pregnancy, were not receiving treatment that they needed in order to have a healthy and safe pregnancy as well. Women who had very young children and are breastfeeding mothers, who need to be able to, again, be given adequate nutrition and medical care. That was also, there were obviously serious gaps there. And so we've documented in different countries across Europe where we found different things. And now this situation will be ongoing. There are some places, when this initially started, had not appointed gender advisors, had not appointed focal points to really look at the situation of women and girls. Some of that is changing a little bit now. But ultimately, there has been a lack of understanding and focus on women and girls in particular. The understanding has mainly been by European policy leaders that this has been a migration of vastly young men. And as a result, they have overlooked women and girls' needs.
Yes, okay. Well, I mean, I really appreciate, obviously, your time and effort for taking sort of, the liberty and the opportunity to speak to us about the current situation. So thank you so much, Rafna. Sorry about the technical problems that we had earlier, but thank you so much for taking part in Her Voice, and we hope to speak to you soon in the near future.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Lady Nicholson, have you yourself been in refugee camps anywhere in Iraq or Syria?
I've been in refugee camps many times, both in Iraq, not in Syria, but in many other parts of the world. So I have a lot of experience of the incredible stress and the awful situations that refugees are put under in refugee camps. Refugee camps are very, very poor these days, very, very bad indeed, and there are more and more of them. The average length of stay in a refugee camp now is 11 years.
Oh my Lord, yeah,
and the facilities are monstrously poor.
Yeah,
Sometimes they're not there at all, despite the huge sums of money that are poured in. They don't actually even have basic human waste disposal. So everybody has a bad tummy.
Of course. I mean, what challenges have you actually faced during your presence in refugee camps, helping deliver emergency aid and healthcare to the displaced?
I don't face any challenges at all personally in a refugee camp, other than a feeling of the deepest sorrow that fellow men and women and children should have to put up with these unspeakable situations without any knowledge of whether they're going to get home again. So I think my real problem is to be cheerful and happy and in order to lift people's spirits, when inside myself I'm really in despair. So that's the only problem I've ever faced in a refugee camp.
Yes, I see. Okay. Human Rights Watch, do you think they have a big role in trying to help refugees and trying to report, all incidents that are taking place in camps or, on sort of in war zones?
It's very important indeed that outside voices are heard. Very important indeed that outsiders are allowed to listen, if you like it, to the refugees, because the refugees themselves, all 60 million of them, are trapped. They're in a place they can't get out of, both mentally and physically. They spend their day queuing up to try to get basic foodstuffs, for example. So refugees themselves have really no voice. They are voiceless people.
Yes.
So all of us who have the honour to be able to talk with refugees must use their knowledge and display it if they ask us to do so.
Yes.
I've never forgotten a woman whose husband was a victim of Saddam Hussein, and he had him rolled over by a tank.
Oh.
They lined up and the tanks rolled over the whole lot of them. And the woman was frantic and she said to me, "Take my voice to the world, speak for me. I can't. You must say what is happening." I've never forgotten that. So yes, we have a duty not to disclose their personal circumstances, but to respond to those requests. The other thing to remember is that people in camps have their own privacy. They have almost no privacy there.
Yes.
So it's desperately important, in my opinion,
Yes.
to be absolutely respectful and to make sure that this tiny space they have will just be some awful tent with the rain coming in, 15 people living in the tent of their family, perhaps. That's all they've got. You must respect it.
Yes.
So if they want you to speak, goodness me, get out and speak.
Lady Nicholson, what help is offered to women refugees that tend to be abandoned by their families or dishonoured following the rape and abuse they encountered by ISIS and other terror groups? Bearing in mind that quite a lot of these young girls, actually, once they actually go back to their families, their families think, yeah, they've been, attacked, they've been raped, we don't want them anymore. So they abandon them. So what help do like Ammar Foundation, what help do they offer?
The Yazidi people took a completely different position from any other group I've ever met, and it's rather a magnificent position. The prince of the Yazidis, who is the head of the Yazidi people, that's their structure, he declared, I think about at least 3 months ago, that what has happened under Daesh did not happen. It was a magnificent thing to say, absolutely amazing.
It's amazing, of course.
Because that means that the rapes didn't occur. And I had talks with some of the young ladies in one of the big camps where MR is seeing 600 patients a day, every day at the moment, where we have some hundreds of Yazidi staff. And we discussed that, and they felt it made them feel a whole lot better.
Yes.
Although it didn't help them with the nightmares, it made them know that they were Yazidis still, and that they were highly respected by the prince himself, who in fact I'm going to see this evening. He's middle 80s and quite elderly, so I'm going to him.
Oh, I see.
But I just want to congratulate him on that enormously far-sighted thing. And in Dohuk province, which is where the camps are, there are 22 refugee camps in that province alone in Iraq, and others scattered around Iraq, right down to the bottom below Basra. In that particular province, which has the bulk of it, the head of the health directorate, a wonderful man, he is in fact himself not just a medical doctor with about 5 different qualifications, he's also a psychiatrist.
I see.
So he's set up, and also Amar is participating, a magnificent effort whereby he has a team of 3 of them, including one Yazidi female psychiatrist, and they work on the cases very hard, just as we do. So everybody should come together on this, who is medical and psychological.
Of course.
And we are the partners of the health directorate in Dohuk province, as well as in Erbil, where there are more camps. So come together and provide the very, very best overall healthcare, physical healthcare, mental healthcare, and spiritual healthcare in that sense. I've never heard any other organisation or group of people have that statement. And it's a statement I'd like to really pin up at the top of the wall and say, come on, everybody else should do that.
Yes.
When you've been raped, you're a victim. You're not an aggressor. And if I may say that throughout a number of countries, wherever they happen to be, women victims are very often treated as if it was all their fault.
Absolutely.
So we need a
Yes.
different attitude towards our gender. Our gender is very special. Most women have babies, most women spend a lot of their time looking after elderly relations or the sick. Women are very special. I mean, I'm a normal woman, I don't happen to have any children, I had stepchildren, but I so admire my gender. And when I see these women in refugee camps and IDP camps, my heart bleeds. I know that I couldn't do what they do with such dignity, such courtesy, and such continual service to those who they are looking after.
Yeah.
So they deserve everything. And we must call upon the male sex to stop this vilifying of women. 220 million girls out of 5 have female genital mutilation, the most cruel and vicious assault on the heart of a woman there ever is. That sort of thing is unspeakable, and it degrades the male sex as well. So
Yes.
I think this is one of the most important things to look at, is the dignity of women, all ages, and we really have to get behind that. On top of that, the women themselves, some women themselves, who indulge in vile trades, such as pornography.
Yes, well, that they chose to
they
do that.
too
Yes.
are ruining
Yes.
the respect for women. They're just degrading themselves, but
Of
they're
course.
also degrading the rest of us. I think we really need a huge education program, if you like it, instead of
Yes.
vilifying women,
Yes.
or the disabled, or anybody else who we don't happen to feel like, or another religion. We must learn respect. Much, much greater word than tolerance. It's respect for the other, and then a fondness for them.
Yes, yes. Well, I mean, it sounds like it is going to be a long process, obviously, trying to get these sort of women refugees that are vulnerable, obviously, at this stage, following their, torment that they've gone through.
Well, if you do the job properly,
Yes.
it's amazing how quickly things proceed.
Yes.
I sometimes ask people who photograph maybe an MR health centre,
Yeah.
I say, please find me a really miserable photograph. And they say, we can't. Well, the MR patients are happy. And you see, if you look after
That's
people,
brilliant,
if you
yes.
care for people,
Yes.
it's amazing how humans respond.
Yes.
So all I can find is happy faces. It doesn't work very well for a fundraising campaign, but it's the best,
the best
thing
thing
ever.
Absolutely.
Men, women and children smiling,
That's
laughing.
what you need. That's what you need to see. Absolutely.
Yes, it's gorgeous. It's amazing what you can do with just the simplest tools, as it were.
That's
Health, education, and basically tender loving care and
Beautiful.
high respect for the individual, whoever they are.
Brilliant. Now, I actually would like to welcome to the show Dr. Andrea Claudia Hoffman. She's a senior editor in Focus magazine and Middle East expert and author of many books about the area. Welcome to Her
Great.
Voice, Andrea.
Hello.
Hello.
From Germany.
Thank you very much for joining us. Now, you recently co-authored the book The Girl Who Beat ISIS by Farida Khalaf. Tell us more about it, since it's just been published here in the UK.
Yes, it's a story about a girl, a Yazidi girl called Farida Khalaf, which I met in a Yazidi refugee camp in northern Iraq. And she told me the story about how IS, or Daesh, as she says, came to her village and attacked it and shot all the men, including her father and her oldest brother, and took all the women as captives. And then she told me the whole story of her captivity and what she had to suffer.
That's terrible. That's terrible.
Yes.
Now, how did you actually manage to sort of have her sort of talk to you about it?
Yes, it was a long process, you know. First of all, I have to say that Farida has a very strong character, so she really wanted to talk about what happened to her. You know, she had this feeling that, okay, you know, they did all this to her and it was terrible and it was so unjust. So but the least you can do afterwards is make the world know about it. And she was especially keen of having the mothers of those men knowing what they did, you know. She wanted to embarrass them. So that was her motivation. But of course it was a difficult process, you know, for me gaining her trust and you know, the two of us getting to know each other and in order to talk about all these very difficult subjects.
Yes, of course. Now, following the exploitation and torture that this young girl had suffered, will she ever be able to lead a normal life, in your opinion?
Well, it depends what you consider normal. Of course, you know, you can never erase this from your biography or from your memories. That's impossible. And she's still suffering the physical consequences. She has her back is still hurting from the beatings, and of course the psychological consequences. You know, but I very much wish for her that she will be able to lead a good life. You know,
Yes.
I won't say a normal life, but
It won't be normal.
Now, it won't be normal, but it might be a good life.
Yes.
Nevertheless, you know, I wish that for her. But of course, she is hurt, and she will be hurt all of her life. You can't deny that. Nevertheless, I hope she will make the best out of it, and she will be able to integrate into German society, because she's living here right now, and that's not an easy process as well.
Of course. I've actually got Baroness Emma Nicholson here with me, and she wanted to actually make a point following what you just said there, Andrea.
That was all fascinating. And listening as a politician, I want to remind everyone that the most important thing to claim your rights, you must have legal status. We should fight tooth and nail to get every single woman in the world status, legitimate rights, rest upon the recognition in the law of where you are, that you are an individual, you have the right to move around, to drive, to speak, everything, that you have the same rights as men, or if you're in a minority, that you have the same rights as everyone else where you happen to be living. So the law is critical. Remember that UN rights are in that sense theoretical. They can't be put into practice by the UN. They have to be put into practice locally. And what you need for that is you need the stable base of the right to be yourself, which other people in that society will have.
I see. Did you hear that, Andrea?
Yes, and I think that's especially, I totally agree with that. You know, I've been traveling to Afghanistan a lot, for example, and there women had a lot of rights which they didn't know about, you know, or weren't able to execute. And in Farida's case, it's especially complicated because now, living in Germany, she has all these rights, but she is still living in the Yazidi community. And traditionally, of course, the women do not have the same rights as men, and it will take a long time for that to change. But as you say, laws are the first step. Laws you can rely on, that you can reclaim.
Yes.
You see, just to take Iraq as an example,
Right.
because Iraq wasn't around or didn't sign or wasn't listening, or why should it, in 1951, the Convention for Refugees was not signed by Iraq.
I see.
Indeed, it was designed for Europe, for Eastern Europe, the refugees coming out of the World War II. So that means that Syrian refugees, you and I are calling refugees in Iraq, they don't qualify as refugees. They don't come under that convention because it wasn't signed.
I see.
IDPs globally are in an even worse situation. They have no legal status of any sort. And generally speaking, it's their own government that has aggressed them, or those reflecting their own government that has aggressed them. They have no rights of any sort at all.
Right.
I promise you, we need to look at the law always. So in a sense, Claudia and I are fighting the same battle, but from slightly different angles. We're in parallel, but
Yes.
aiming for the same
Aim
goal.
for the same goal, yes,
What she's
of
saying is fascinating. I say we must get these women legal status.
Legal status, of
Then
course.
we can implement.
That's true. That's true. Now, Andrea, as an author, you enjoy writing about women who fight for their rights and their freedom, just like obviously Lady Nicholson here. Is it not a losing battle, though, for women refugees, whether they are in the Middle East or Europe? And we're only talking about the women refugees here, Andrea.
No, I don't think so. I think the more women reclaim their rights and the more women talk about it, the more other women get to know that this is a topic and that you have the right to reclaim your rights. And so it might be a long battle, and I don't deny that there are setbacks, but in general, I'm optimistic, over the long run.
Yes, yes. And what do you think, Lady Nicholson?
I think that people such as myself are very fortunate. Here I am in a society where my rights are legally established and where I can fight anybody who's going to take them away from me. So it's people like myself who must speak out loud and clear for the rights of others. And we need to galvanize an army. And indeed, there are many wonderful people who speak, but we all need to speak with one voice. We need
That's
to speak
true.
very loud.
Yes.
On top of that, I'm afraid we need root and branch reform of the United Nations. A little bit like the Convention for Refugees of 1951, the whole UN structure is very out of date. And somehow we've all got to get together, and that's difficult. The UN tries very hard and does wonderful things,
Yes.
but the structure and the system are in the 1950s, and we're nearly 100 years on now, and it just doesn't work.
No, of course.
So that's a big
Time
task.
has changed, hasn't it?
And that
Yes.
again is what we've got to go for IDPs to have no status of any sort, for Syrian refugees in Iraq to have no status legally. This isn't good enough.
Yes.
This is why people stay in refugee camps for 11 years without solid human waste disposal, as is happening in northern Iraq, when the UN is meant to be in charge. And when the money pours in, you know there's more money now
Yes.
for refugees, IDPs and humanitarian crises than ever before.
Yes.
And in my experience, a lifetime of experience on this, there's less and less and less that gets down to the people themselves.
Yes, I
So,
see. So
come
something is
on,
happening along
these
the way
big
there, isn't there?
things
Yes.
really matter.
Really matter.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, we will need to end it here, I'm afraid, as we have reached the end of our show. I would like to thank Baroness Emma Nicholson, founder of Amar Foundation. Thank you for coming to Her Voice and joining us today. I would also like to thank Rosna Bijum from HRW for taking part. Dr. Andrea Hoffman, thank you so much for joining us, editor of Focus Magazine.
Thank you.
And Rosen Hanjul for joining us too. Thank you very
And
much.
thank you.
ladies.
Thank you for this programme.
You're
We're
welcome.
really grateful.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. Now, on Her Voice, you have listened to all the horrific stories that our guests have shared with us about the exploitation of women refugees in Iraq and Syria. But you probably say to yourself, well, this doesn't concern me, so why should I care? Leave it to the politicians. Surely they will solve the problem. Well, actually, there is a lot we can do to help. We can start by donating money to a number of charities aimed at helping refugees, just like Amar Foundation, that are on the ground in conflict-ridden areas, trying to help people on the move. We can volunteer our time and expertise by helping whenever we can and needed. We can make our voice heard by protesting and signing petitions to get the government to debate this crisis. There's so much we can do for the sake of humanity and dignity for these vulnerable women. If there's a way, if there's a will, there's a way. Thank you for joining me. Thank you.